Starting from Veeam Data Platform version 12.3, you can now backup Entra ID from the Veeam Backup and Replication console. To do that, the first thing to make sure is your build number is 12.3. If not, you can download the latest ISO from veeam.com and update to the latest version. So once you update it to the latest version, you will see a new plugin appearing here called Microsoft Entra ID plugin for Veeam Backup and Replication. So this plugin will allow us to connect the Entra ID tenancy into the Veeam Backup and Replication console, so we can start backing it up and do the restore operations as well. So the first task in performing this data protection activity is adding the Entra ID tenancy into the Veeam Backup and Replication console. To do that, we go into the inventory, go to the Microsoft Entra ID, right click and click on add Microsoft Entra ID tenant. I have already added one of my tenancies. I'm going to add my second tenancy here. So add Microsoft Entra ID tenant. It's going to ask me for my tenant ID. It also shows me where to find this information from. So I'm going to go to my Entra ID admin center, identity overview, and copy this tenant ID. So once done, I'm going to come back here and paste the tenant ID. So you can specify a description. So I'm going to call it as my tenant to Entra ID. Now it's asking you to select a cache repository. So the cache repository will be used to store some temporary metadata to reduce the load on the backup server during the backup operation. The cache repository typically keeps the track of all the log records that changed between the backup sessions. So I'm going to select my REFS repository as my cache repository and click on OK and click next. So now it's going to ask me to either create an application from here or connect an already created application. So this is Microsoft Graph application. So I'm going to let Veeam create the application for me. So I'm going to click on the create new account, click next. It's going to ask me for my passcode. So, and I'm going to have to actually supply the passcode in this URL here. So I'm going to copy this passcode, go in here, go to microsoft.com/device login, specify the code, authenticate myself. If I go back into the console and click on apply, Veeam will now go and create that application for me to connect my Entra ID into the backup console. So once this is added, I can click next, finish. So I have now added my second tenancy. So now we have added the tenancy, we can start creating backup jobs. To do that, come back to the home section, click on backup, right click, backup, Entra ID backup. I can create a tenant backup or logs backup. So tenant backup is going to help you backup your objects such as users, groups, administrative units, roles, and application. And logs obviously will allow you to backup your audit and sign-in logs. So I've already created two jobs. One is for the objects and other is for the logs. I'm going to right click the object job, click on edit, give it a name and a description, and select the tenant for which you wanted to perform the object backups of and how long you want this backup to be retained, like a retention policy. And in the advanced, you can specify any encryption password. So the recommended practice is to always encrypt your backup. To do that, you can enable this checkbox, specify a password, and your backups will be encrypted by the password that you specify. So click next. Now specify the schedule at which this backup is going to run. So you can run the backup daily, monthly, or even periodically. So if you, for whatever reason, you want to run this backup continuously, you can do that, which means if the backup finishes, the next session is going to start. If you don't want to do that, you can specify and run it once a day or once on a specific days, so on and so forth. Also, you can specify your backups to run only on a specific window. So you can either permit or stop the backup from running within a certain window. So let's say, for example, if you don't want your backups to be running from 9 a.m. in the morning and 5 a.m. in the evening, you can say don't run it during the time. So which means the backup is not going to run during that period. You can even set the backup to run continuous, which means it run continuous outside the office hours, but don't run during the business hours. So once this is done, you can click apply and finish. So now I have created a backup job to back up all my objects. So the next backup job is the log backup. So if I right click and edit the backup job, you can specify the name for the logs backup and which tenant that you want, for which you want to perform the logs backup of. Click next. And in the storage, you can specify a repository at which you want to store this backups in. So you can actually find the supported repository by actually going into the Veeam user guide and configure Veeam backup for Entra ID section, and under the log and cache repositories you can see what are the supported repository. So the cache repositories, which we saw already, it's going to support these two type of repositories, and for the actual storage repository of your logs, it's going to support all of it. So Veeam actually uses the unstructured backup engine, which is the engine that Veeam used to back up the unstructured data such as NASs, file shares, or object storage. Is the same engine that Veeam is using for your Entra ID logs backup. So whatever the repository supported by those components is also going to be supported by logs backup as well. So you can specify the retention policy either by days, months, and years, or you can specify a second destination. So if you want to have a backup copy for your Entra ID, which means you obviously always wanted to follow 3 to 1. So the third copy of your data, so first is your production, the second copy is going to go to this location, and if you want to have a third copy, then you can configure it directly from here as well. So under advanced, you can specify the compression level and encryption for the logs backup, and under maintenance you can specify it to do health check to detect and auto heal any corrupted logs. So once this is done, you can specify the schedule. Schedule is same as what we saw with the object backup, and click on apply and finish. You got yourself your log backup. So I have one tenancy with 2 jobs, one job backing up all my objects, and my second job is backing up all my logs, which is audit and sign-in logs. So once the backup finish, it's time to do the restore. To do the restore, we go on to disk. Before we start the restore, I'll probably drag your attention here under the platform. So if you look at the object backup, it says the platform is Entra ID, but if you look at the platform for the logs, it says unstructured data, because as I mentioned, it's unstructured data engine that Veeam is reusing to perform the Entra ID logs backup. So the engine is already tried and tested because it's already been used by other backup jobs such as NAS, file shares, and object storage. So to perform a restore, I'm gonna first show you guys how the object restore works. So expand it, go to the Entra ID tenancy, right click and restore. It will open a web-based explorer. So in this explorer, you can see that you can restore users, groups, administrative units, roles, and application. So if you wanted to restore a user, or you can restore multiple users at a given time. So I can select a couple of users, restore, and restore do a full restore of 2 users. So interesting thing in this section is I can specify different restore point for different users. Say for example, the first user, if I wanted to restore from the latest restore point, and the second user, if I wanted to restore from some of another restore points, I can do that as well. So it's not necessarily you need to restore them from a same restore point. So the next step, it's gonna give me the same device logon code that we authenticate ourselves with when we added the tenancy. So we're gonna get the code, authenticate ourselves, and proceed forward. So copy the code, go into the Entra ID. So once I authenticate myself, I'll go back into the Veeam console, and it says I'm authenticated. Click next. So you can either overwrite the object. So if the object is already available in the present, but you want to restore it with a different copy for whatever reason, you can do that. Or if you're doing a bulk restore, and if you want to skip the ones that are already there, you can do that. You can set a default password for the user when logging in. So I'm going to set a default password for this user, and you can request the user to change the password during the first login and set a temporary password. So you can also set Veeam to maintain the relationships such as the applications are part of, or memberships, and so on and so forth. And if the item has been recently deleted, it will be in your recycle bin. You can use that object by restoring it directly from the recycle bin rather than restoring it from the Veeam itself. So click next, give it a reason, and finish. So Veeam now tells me these two users are already there. You still want me to proceed? I say yes. So now Veeam finished restoring those two users that we selected. So I'm going to close out of it. So the other interesting restore that you can do here is restoring the metadata. So what do I mean by that? So if I go into my tenancy and select a user, for example, let's say select this user and changed some of their properties, for example. So if I changed it to old and deleted this as, or changed this user principal name. So imagine you ran a script that went and changed UPN for hundreds of users. So how easily we can restore them? So we can go back into the Veeam console here, select the user or multiple users and do metadata comparison. So what it is now doing is comparing what's in the production in the live versus what we have in the backup and showing only the changes that actually differ from backup versus the production copy. So once this comparison is done, you can see the production record have changed. For example, the identities have changed. I've changed the mail ID to something else that's not supposed to be what it is, and then the surname is now changed from Langer to Langer Old, for example. So instead of restoring the entire user account, I can only reset this metadata information. To do that, I select those, click next, and obviously authenticate myself with my device code. So I'm going to copy this code, go back in here and go to enter the code, click next. Go back into my Veeam console, authenticate it, click next and finish. So once the restore is finished, I'm going to close out of this console, go back into my tenancy and do a refresh for this user. So Veeam should reset all these changes that we have made unexpectedly. So if I click on edit properties, you can see it put back all the settings. So this might look like a little feature when you look at it from a single user point of view, but when this happened at scale, this will be a life-changing feature, because obviously you don't want to go and change this individually, or you don't want to restore the entire user account. Rather, you just restore only those metadata that has changed. So the next type of restore is restoring the groups. So you can restore an entire group or compare the metadata and restore only those metadata information. So you can align them or filter them based on the type of group. So Veeam support Microsoft 365 security, mail enabled and distribution. And you can also filter them based on assigned and dynamic. So based on the testing I did, if you delete a group or restore a group back again with Veeam, it put back the membership and users that are part of that group, be it an assigned membership or a dynamic membership. Veeam goes and put them back together again. So the third is administrative units. So again, full restore, metadata comparison and restore. You can actually filter them based on whether it is a public, AU or a hidden one. So the fourth one is roles. So Veeam will allow you to do a restore of the roles, either the entire role or the metadata comparison, and you can actually filter them based on whether they are built-in roles or custom roles, which means you can back up and restore both type of roles, and whether the role is enabled or not, you can still back them up. So the last component is application. So we can back up the app registration and the service principal. So every time you create an application or an app registration, like the one that I created when adding my Entra ID into my Veeam backup and replication console, it creates both app registration and a service principal. So with Veeam, you can back up and restore both. So if I click on, I look for the app registration with the name Veeam, you can see I have my application and service principal, which I created. I can restore them both. So when I do a restore, I can actually select different restore point for different based on the application and service principal, authenticate myself, copy the code, So once authenticated, you can go next. In the options, you can overwrite the application and the service principal, or skip if it's already available in the production. Again, you can also keep the relationship, which is the membership and group membership and other application membership. Similarly, you can restore it from the recycle bin. So this can be quite handy. We already talked about it when we do the restore of the user objects. See, another interesting use case why this will be handy is when you restore from the Veeam backup, it's essentially recreating that object. So when that application gets recreated, if you don't have this option checked, the application will get its new app ID and you will not have your client secret because or a certificate for that matter, because it's a new application that Veeam is recreating. But if you have this checkbox enabled, Veeam will look for a deleted copy in your recycle bin, and which is the Entra ID recycle bin, and Veeam restore it from that location, which will enable you to do the restore of both the existing app ID, certificates, and this client secret. You can restore all of them as a part of it. So this can be quite handy if you want to put back all the information that you already had without recreating the entire application from scratch. So click next, give it a reason, click next and finish. So now Veeam will initiate the restore and perform the restore of the app registration. So the next restore is logs restore. To do that, expand that particular object and click on restore. It will open up the log restore explorer. So you can actually see it's been grouped based on the months at which these logs were captured from. So you can have audit logs and sign-in logs. If I click on audit logs, I can click on copy to, and it's asked me whether I wanted to restore this particular log from the latest state or earlier point in time state. If I select this earlier point in time state, it'll then ask me which restore point that I wanted to restore it from and the destination to which I wanted this to be restored to. So I can add a server to which I wanted to restore it to directly from here, or if I wanted to restore it to the same server, which is maybe in backup and replication server, and specify a location at which I wanted to restore this to. So once you click finish, Veeam will then restore this entire folder into my C drive. If you want a particular audit log to be restored, instead of restoring the entire log folder, you can then double click and go as granular as individual file. So the another thing that's probably worth mentioning here is where these backups are stored. As I mentioned, the logs backups are stored in the repository that you choose, backup or backup copy repository, depending on what you choose. And the object backups are stored in Postgres database. So if I open my PG admin, you can take a look at it creating a separate Postgres database for each of your tenants. So I have 2 tenants, remember? So it created 2 databases. So for service providers, you can be rest assured that the tenant data are logically separated into their own databases. And if you ever wanted to delete a single tenant's backup from your offering, it will not actually delete the other tenant or affect the other tenant backups in any way, shape or form. They're logically separated and have their own databases. So with that, I hope everyone have some takeaway from this demo. If you have any question, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next demo. Thank you.